Hello and welcome on into Classic Pro Wrestling with the WFIA podcast. I am Chris DiCarlo, the Vice President now of the WFIA, and down underneath me, is the man with class, Mike the Class DiCagorio from Rhode Island. How are you, sir? We did this last week.
He's fine.
He's fine. Over in the corner to my left, producer and friend, a one and only player, Mr. Benny Scala.
I feel like this is almost Hollywood Squares. I could be like Charlie Weaver to block.
Yeah.
And this week we are entitled this Reliving Classic Pro Wrestling. We have three great historians in the business. Some of them we already know are great men and friends of ours. So in between me and Benny, we'll start with the historian of Canada and all the territories, our good friend, Mr. Wes Maidman.
Hey, thanks very much for Chris, and great to meet everybody here. We're looking forward to another great show. As per usual, you've done a fine job introducing us.
Thank you. And underneath Wes is another great historian friend, not just the AWA, but all the territories, Mr. George Shire.
Everybody, hello. I'm still working at being that reflection of perfection, the number one selection.
Man of the hour. The man with the power.
Good one.
And our new friend and historian has a time tunnel. He is next to George, underneath Benny, Mr. Tony Richards. Hello and welcome.
Hello, everybody. So glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, great to meet you, Tony.
Yes, likewise.
Good to meet you.
Well, a little WFIA business here first. Speaking of which, Benny, I got a board meeting Monday night to talk about you. So anyway, if you can all go, please, to the WFIA.org. We are charging $50 dues, which is $50 for the whole calendar year. You get 2 classic magazines that we have coming out, a picture of a classic wrestler, and we're hoping to have an in-person convention next year in St. Louis with our good friend promoter, Mr. Herb Simmons of the SICW. So, and also we have t-shirts and mugs also. So that is the WFIA.org. Please and thank you. Also, subscribe and watch this show, Classic Pro Wrestling with the WFIA podcast, each and every Saturday night on the Monty and DeFaro YouTube channel. And we appreciate them, and we appreciate Benny, of course. So, guys, we got 2 classic clips. And Benny, if you will, please roll Dory, number 1.
Here comes Dory.
Thank you.
Yikes.
Yes. Bedlam.
It's a bloodbath.
Okay, I'm here. Sorry, I had a little technical screw up there, but there was no sound to these clips, and we here are seeing Dory Funk Jr. in a rare one against the natural Butch Reed, and this was in St. Louis, the Kiel Auditorium. So some little classic Dory Funk Jr.
Nice.
There. I forgot my saying. I got confused, right? These videos, clips, I do not sell them. I do not rent them to nobody. They are clipped for our enjoyment of this show and my personal collection. So, guys, Dory Funk Jr., We've seen him there, Southwest Championship Wrestling. Of course, he's been in almost every territory but the AWA, I believe, right, George?
Dory was here, but never in his championship years or anything. He had come through a couple of times just for some shots. Terry was here early on.
Right.
He had come in here
85.
in the about 60. Terry was here about 64-ish, 65, and he was actually doing TV jobs. But Dory Sr. had sent him up here, and Vern worked with him a little bit. You know, they had, between the two of them, Dory Sr. and Vern, you know, you couldn't come up with two better guys to give you some training. But we know the Stu Harts and the Eddie Grahams or Hiro Matsudas and all the rest of them. I mean, grant you, they all, wow. But Dory and Vern, you got pretty good training if you had them in your backyard.
That's Ivy League.
Yeah.
And Terry was although it was under the Pro Wrestling USA banner, but with the AWA and NWA in 85.
Yeah.
So what Wes?
I wish I had have seen Dory, but it is my oldest TV wrestling memory of when they used to send out the tapes. George, you would know this. Tony, you know this too. When they used to send out the tapes to different territories when the champion was coming or the whoever. And I remember Lord Layton in Toronto introducing Dory Funk Jr., the National Wrestling Heavyweight Champion, coming to Toronto to face the Sheik or to whoever. And that's my earliest memory of wrestling. And I just watching those videos, George, you're going to know this answer to this question because I've never seen him live. How tall was Dory? Dory, sometimes he looks like he's 6'3" or 6'4", and sometimes he doesn't. It's strange.
I actually saw him live in Tampa, Florida, after he was NWA champion. But yeah, I want to say 6 foot, you know, and angles and everything are different. He could be 6'1", you know, so I can't really tell you what he was, you know, whatever they bill him as on the night of the card.
Yeah. It just against Butch Reed there, he looked huge.
Well, and that's another thing. We should just give mention to Butch Reed. I thought that Butch Reed was a hell of a talent.
Oh, God, yeah.
You know, when I saw him in St. Louis, he was doing the hacksaw thing. But he came in and worked for Vern for, you know, in the scheme of it all, it was a coffee break. But he had come in as kind of a bodyguard for gorgeous Jimmy Garvin around, I don't know, mid-'80s. And it was very short-lived, but man, he put on some cool matches. I was very impressed. And I really loved his work later on when he was teamed with Ron Simmons in Doom.
Oh, God, yeah. Fantastic team.
I thought that was the coolest team. Probably one of the, you know, because I love tag teams. And I think that was one of the last teams that I really got excited about.
Tony.
Yeah. Well, I've been immersed in the Funk family for about a year now because I'm writing a Dory Funk Sr. and Amarillo book at the moment. And I think Dory was 6'2", actually.
Okay.
And he played lineman for West Texas State. So he, at least in his high school years, he had the body of a football lineman. He dropped a little bit of weight actually getting into the wrestling business.
Well, I mean, just talk about a real quick. I mean, a lot of his matches were great, of course, but I watched the clinic. Two great Dory and Mike Rotundo, either in Championship Wrestling from Florida or the NWA there, 87. I mean, what a match those two put on. I mean, just like Bret Hart versus Kurt Hennig.
The other thing I'd tell you too is that Johnny Doyle and Doc Sarpolis had a really strong relationship. And when Johnny Doyle and Jim Barnett went to Australia in '64, I think Dory was on one of the first tours in Australia in '65. So he's had a wide, broad career.
Certainly has, yeah.
Wow. And of course I had a technical problem. That classic match everybody talks about, that tag team Terry and Dory versus the Sheik and Abdullah from Japan. I mean, what a brawl, what a bloodbath. I mean, but a classic, right?
It's for the fans of that, yeah. But I seen Dory snap marrying Abby about like 10 times in that match because she of course wouldn't do anything. So they have to put some wrestling holds on someone. Now I'm a big Sheik fan, so I enjoyed the match, but you know that takes away from sometimes what we really love, and which is real action.
Right. I mean, like the Sheik versus, Bobo versus Andre. You never really seen him really wrestle many people. I mean, did he actually wrestle other than, well, he wrestled Mark Lewin, a couple of times pretty good that I've seen. Did he wrestle anybody else than Mark Lewin, Wes?
He would have wrestled like tons of guys in the 50s because we would have had to because he wasn't gimmick laden. I guess you could say that. You know, he was out in the AWA ish area sort of for a while, Milwaukee and that, and you know he had to wrestle back in those days, right, George?
Yeah, he was in Omaha in the early 60s doing a lot of main events.
Yeah, he got over in Amarillo in 61, 62. He had a program with Funk Singer, and he really got over in El Paso, too, in the early 60s. And he wrestled most of the guys out there.
One of the things I remember was interesting about the Sheik down in the Amarillo and Lubbock, Texas area. In the 60s, when Vern Gagne dropped his AWA title to the Crusher up here for a little bit, Vern had taken a tour down, and he was working down in the Funk territory, and he was actually billed down there as the world champion. And he was, one of the matches he defended against was the Sheik. And I just thought that was funny because in those days, he was down there as the world champ, but he wasn't the champ because the Crusher was up here defending the real AWA title. But it tells you about kayfabe, how they were able to pull that stuff off. Nobody would ever be the wiser. You know, they were seeing the great Vern Gagne. That's all that mattered.
That's right.
They were a little loose with the world title in Amarillo. When Doc Sarpolis was president of the NWA there in 61, I think, they named their own world champion. Lou Thez was actually the champion, but they didn't recognize Lou. They recognized their own. And
Who did they recognize?
They made Gene Kaniski their champion.
Oh, okay. I guess I kind of knew that. Yeah.
And he was also the WWA world champion too.
Yeah.
For Wilbur.
Wow. So that, I mean, we know that kind of scenario, right? With Flair having some title wins and losses that, a lot of people don't know about, like from Puerto Rico, and there was somewhere else he lost and won it from. I can't think off the top of my head, but and Backlund, right, Benny? We talked about Bob Backlund against Antonio Inoki.
That was never recognized. At least the NWA would recognize, like, when they go into Japan and they drop the title to Baba, it was like leaving your suit at the cleaners. I'll drop this belt and I'll come pick it up on my way back. But at least they recognized those. But yeah, WWF did not. They did not recognize the Backlund title change. His reign it's always been listed as continuous.
And they also had Tatsumi Fujinami was the WWF's junior champion at Madison Square Garden in Japan. I mean, so I don't know. Yeah, they wouldn't recognize Inoki unless Vince Sr. had a problem with Inoki. Who knows, right?
I'm of the opinion, and you guys can state otherwise, but I don't care if Flair was champion 28 times. I look at the total amount of days that somebody was a champion. Bruno had 2 reigns of total of 4,000 days. To me, that's all that counts. He was champion for 11 years. Flair, like combined, maybe it was 5.5.
Well, I take a different approach on it, and I do agree with you about the number of days someone was champion. And, guys like Gagne and Thez and all them, Harley Race, they all stand in that parade of number of days. But I always get a kick out of when they would say, well, so-and-so is an 8-time world champion or a 10-time world champion. My mind just always said, well, that means he lost it 9 times.
Right.
Right.
That's putting a negative to a positive. Just say he was the world champion. You don't have to give us 27 times.
They're like Mighty Igor being the champion for 2 weeks. Like,
well, yeah,
he
and
he was the champ, but I mean,
yeah. But that also was one of the last ones that they officially recognized. That why Vern did, I don't know, because they'd already cleared up the double title thing with Omaha a couple years earlier. It was in '63 when they unified the title, the AWA title, when Fritz von Erich had it. Fritz went down to Amarillo and Vern beat him for it, and then it was one champ. Well, then a couple years later, Dusick is pulling his, 1 week champion to build a rematch. And, Tim Woods, people say, well, Tim Woods was Mr. Wrestling. He was AWA champ. Not according to the records, but he did beat Mad Dog for a week.
Okay. I didn't know that.
But the AWA never recognized it. Joe Dusick did. And that's the thing that always bothers me, because you try and tell these fans, well, they weren't really a champion. Well, they saw a win. They saw a loss. They're not wrong.
Yeah.
Right.
How do you do that?
Tony, your opinion on this?
Well, we started out this conversation with Dory Jr. and I think he probably had one of the best championship runs of almost any. I mean, he
was 5 years, right?
He was NWA champion for almost 4 years, and it traveled the world. And in my opinion, and this is somewhat a controversial thing, but it's just my opinion, I think he was the best NWA champion of all time.
Wow. Okay.
Well, I'd put him up there in the rankings as being one of the best for sure.
And the reason I would say that is I think Dory always left his opponent strong.
Yeah.
And they were always better after the match than they were before, which was the primary objective of the title holder. And the reason I wouldn't put Lou there, which is why a lot of people ask me that, I don't think that was always the case with Lou. I don't think they always looked better after they worked with Lou than they did before.
I agree with you on that.
You're a traveling champion. You have to do that. You have to go to this place and the next place and the next place, and you have to prove that guy could beat you and make him strong after the fact, so that he can still hold his
right, because he's still going to be there.
Yeah, his area title or whatever regional title, whatever he might have, or the biggest heel or whatever in the area. And then that was so important back then, and it sucks that it became not important.
Well, I think Dory had a great balance. He looked like the champion. He carried himself like the champion, but he also looked beatable. And I think you have to I think Thez got to the point where people just thought he wasn't beatable. But Dory always looked like, I mean, he did so many 60-minute draws. I mean, his matches with Briscoe, they thought the title was going to change every time those guys wrestled.
Yeah.
And that's a lost art.
Well, and Tony, the thing is about the champion, regardless of what alliance it was back in the day, it was important to do that exact thing, to go into a match, make it look like your opponent had the better of you, and you somehow scraped through, but the fans go home thinking, you know what? The guy got screwed. He should have been the champ tonight. And that's what made a good NWA or even an AWA champion, that you had that feeling that your guy, and of course it built rematches too, but that's what it was all about. And Harley Race,
not screw jobs though, right, George?
Pardon?
Not screw jobs.
No,
not stupidity, not dusty finishes. Actually working and wrestling, and then the old shoulder block in between the ropes, and the guy can't get back in, and realistic things, not ref bumps every bloody time and shit.
But see, that stuff came out. That stuff was getting more predominant in the business as the 80s loomed on. And as we went on, before that, I know when I was a kid, you saw the champ. He was the real deal. I mean, whether it be Dory or Jack, Harley Race in the beginning years, they were all real. Gene Kaniski, I always thought, was just a great NWA champion. because he did exactly that same thing too. He'd go into whatever city he was in, be it Tampa, Houston, whatever, Carolinas, St. Louis, and he could walk out of that ring with the fans saying, "What the hell? How did he retain the title?" And it wasn't a screw job. He just snuck it in there at the last second.
Or the fans would walk out thinking, "Well, my guy will get him next time."
Yeah,
right.
And that's what it's all about. Yeah,
Benny.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of meeting Dory several times. He's got I don't know if he still has it. I believe he does, but the Funking Conservatory in Ocala, which is about 100 miles north. So, yeah, Dory is, I would say, between 6 foot and 6'2". Very, very nice man. His wife is an absolute sweetheart. But yeah, I agree. I mean, he did to me like that NWA World Champion. To me, your job was to go to each territory and make that regional champion look like $1 million. Although you're not going to give him the title, but you're going to have all the fans thinking, "Man, that guy came so close. Next time he comes back, we're going to get him." And that's how you pique the fans' interest. And I think Dory was very, very good at that.
And then, we are talking about different champions, and did you see Bruno? Bruno's got to be on that list, right, Benny?
I think a little bit different though, because Bruno didn't have to do the travel.
Right.
The WWF, went as far as Maine, and pretty much down to maybe, I guess, Wilmington, Delaware. So I mean, he wrestled the loop, and occasionally he'd leave. Like I remember one of the first magazines I ever bought, Wrestling Review, and Bruno went to the Cow Palace, and George will know the story, I'm sure. He wrestled Ray Stevens, 2 out of 3 fall match, and he actually, Stevens pinned him with the bombs away, and I think Bruno made him submit with the bear hug, and on the third fall, Bruno got counted out, and according to the magazine, very huge controversy over who should be the champion. Of course, Bruno kept it, but that's the kind of way that's the way to do it. You leave the fans thinking that, like, man, our guy is so great that he actually defeated the champion of the world.
I think the thing with Bruno that I always wondered about back in the day is if I had been a fan in New York, I would have picked up on the formula at how it worked, because it always seemed like the biggest, greatest heel comes in, works through a couple of the babies, eventually gets his title shot in the Garden. He usually had 2 or 3 shots in the Garden, and then they were done, and the guy was doing prelims and out of the territory. And then there'd be the next big thing. And that was the regular for Bruno for his whole 8 years on the first round. It was always
guys like what's his name, John Quinn, the Kentucky Butcher.
Yeah.
And typically what would happen is he'd either a lot of times Arnold Skolin took the bullet for Bruno. Like I watched the televised match where the Butcher had stretchered. His finisher was the whammy, I guess it was called, which is the pile driver, and he gave it to Arnold Skolin. And now the 2 referees are carrying Skolin out of the ring on a stretcher, and Butcher and his manager was Bobby Davis, who I think is very, very underrated historically as a manager. They both upended the stretcher, and you see Skolin literally flying over the top rope. Next week, Ray Morgan is telling people where to send cards and postcards to White Plains Hospital to Arnie Skolin. But he worked his way through. He beat Edouard Carpentier, which was always a very, very big win back then. And that win over Carpentier got him the match with Bruno. But I think sometimes they only did like one. They were one and done at the Garden, and I think he was a one and done. And then it stuck around for a while. But you're right, George. That formula lasted for the better part of like 15 years.
Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, if you're a longtime, regular, serious fan, it wouldn't take too much for you to figure out that this is a formula and this is the way it's going to go down, which is the reason nobody ever thought Bruno would lose.
Yeah. What's his name? Bob Orton Sr. brought him in as Rocky Fitzpatrick.
Yep.
He was invincible on TV, beat everybody. And then, I think he was one and done with Bruno. Then he kind of slid down the card, and then he was gone.
Well, they even did the same thing with Stan Kowalski when Vince brought him in as crusher or crippler Karl Kovacs.
Kovacs, yes, same
and they
thing.
did the same thing. Same thing.
And it wasn't not much the same or much different for the 127 match unbeaten streak in Toronto for the Sheik. The big guys like Bobo and Haystacks and those, they've got 2 or 3 matches, but the John Quinn kind of guy or Tony Marino or something, that one and done. And I don't understand it. I mean, yes, it was my area growing up and everything, but looking back now, I hate it. And so I'm enamored by when I'm doing research and seeing Dory Funk Jr. hit Kansas City and hit St. Louis and hit Los Angeles and then back to Florida. And they're wrestling against different guys all the time. And it's not the same thing. It's not one and done or two and done. They might do TV, right? And then the match the next night or something, or the day after, and then they're off. They're gone. And that should have been the way it should have been everywhere, but it wasn't.
Tony, you probably know this. If you said you're working on Dory research, Dory and Vern, they wrestled each other a few times.
Yes. Yeah.
Back in the 60s.
Yeah, and they had a great relationship too.
Yep.
Actually, Stanley Blackburn lived in Amarillo. So
there really was a Stanley Blackburn. Yep.
Yep.
Yes, indeed.
And there were a lot of different connections there. I was going to bring up too, as we're talking about this, the NWA, sometimes people are critical of the short-term title runs that they had in the late 70s, early 80s. The way I look at that is that's almost like a Bruno situation in reverse, where in the WWF, Bruno was the invincible babyface. And
right.
When he got beat, if you look at the finishes on those matches with Ivan Koloff and Superstar Graham, the crowd is like shocked. Like they're totally in amazement that Bruno lost. Well, the NWA typically had heel champions. And if you have a guy that's as over as Tommy Rich, or that is as over as Dusty Rhodes, those guys got to win it sometime, because if not, that momentum starts going back the other way. And that's one of the reasons Jerry Jarrett pulled out of the NWA and joined in with Vern, is Lawler couldn't get the title. And Jarrett's like, this is going to kill my babyface draw here. If fans get to the point where they stop believing and they start thinking, well, he's never going to win, I'm not going to go see that. Well, I mean, you got to put them over at some time, if it's only for a week or 6 months or whatever, to get the fans to the point where they start thinking, hey, this guy could win it again. And there's
got to be some payoff.
And only a handful of guys, I mean, Lawler was over like that in Tennessee, and Rich was over like that in Georgia, and Dusty was kind of over like that everywhere. I mean, he had to win. Eddie Graham, he was stomping and throwing a fit because Dusty hadn't won it. And he's like, you're going to kill my guy if he doesn't win it at some point. So they had to give it to him at some point.
Well, there's always, that's good logic and rationale. And I agree with you that eventually, if the guy can't win it and he doesn't win it, then the fans are going to start going. But the thing that was interesting for me is the, as we always call it, the NWA formula that they had during the 50s and the 60s, especially during the 60s and into the the 70s. Their formula was the champ would carry the belt for about 2 to 3 years. That's what they wanted. And generally speaking, that made sense because, to me, it always made more sense to have a guy as champion that can defend the title than a guy that can go in, lose the title, win the title, lose the title, win the title. It goes back to that he's a 27-time champion. To me, that dilutes it and just waters it down, that it doesn't mean anything. So it was important with the NWA formula that Gene Kiniski had it for the, almost 3 years. Same with Dory. Harley, of course, did. And Jack Briscoe had it, I think, for 2 round figures. And that made sense. That the champ, to be the champion, you got to be able to defend it. And of course, Vern, he didn't go in for short championship reigns. He had Mad Dog for a year or for 3 years. He had a couple of quick crusher turns in there, but again, that was the silly thing. Like the crusher's got to win once in a while. That's all it was. And then Nick had it for 5 years, the first time around. That's what makes it a champion. But when you got a guy win, lose, win, lose, win, lose, to me, that's not a champion. It's just not.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, Flair's an anomaly anyway. I mean, none of the guys would ever want to have the title for that long except him. I mean, no one liked that schedule. I mean, 3 years was about as long as anybody could keep up with, that travel.
When you look at that 3 years, that I sat and talked with Jack Briscoe one time, and he told me, he said, after the 2 years, he said, I went to Sam and I said, get it off of me. I can't do it. I don't want to do it anymore. Yeah. And that was only 2 years into it.
I mean, about the time Flair would get to the point where it was time for him to drop it, there'd be a terrible tragedy or something, and they'd have to reshuffle the deck. I mean, that's
well, but in the case of Flair, he's his own biggest mark. Flair wants to be champion because it's just ingrained in him. That's
well,
he still won't retire. So
I think they were all set to mix David Von Erich and Barry Windham into the mix, and then
Magnum TA.
Dave, well, I get to there, and that's just a second. But I think David had his deal where he passed away, and then Barry up and left and went to the WWF. So they had to reshuffle the deck. Well, Dusty reshuffled the deck for Magnum TA, and then that didn't work out because of the incident. So Flair got to keep it longer than they really intended for him to. And then in the later years, it really wasn't the real NWA anymore anyway. So
right.
I agree.
I agree also, Tony. But sorry, George, just let me throw in there, since we're talking about history, though. We didn't see it, of course, until WCW Slamboree 93, when we saw Dory Funk Jr. and Nick Bockwinkel go to the draw. I mean, too bad we didn't see that before, George.
Well, and it's funny you bring that up, because I remember watching it, and I was sad. I was sad to see Nick put on the tights and do it again. And I was sad to see Dory. I mean, they were, let's face it, they were both shells of what their greatness once was. Even though, it was fun to see. But I'm not into that old timer stuff. Go home, sit in a rocking chair, remember it's over. Let us remember you how you were, not the way you are. And that's just me. If I ever saw Ric Flair wrestle again, it'd be too soon. I want him to go away.
Yeah.
And he can't. And, he'll be happy if he has a heart attack in the middle of the ring, and he'll be a happy man. But it's because he's his own mark. He believes that he's the best, and he won't let it go.
Right. I mean, so a lot of them just in kayfabe till the end, right? I mean, they just will never get out of it. What were you going to say, Tony?
Oh, it's a strong drug. I mean, it's a strong drug to be in there and have the adulation of the fans and have that spotlight be on you. And I mean, guys fall in love with the business and they get addicted to it. And I understand that, but at the same time, because of recency bias, people remember you the last few times they saw you, and that's a shame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I remember in 1982 when Nick was champion, Bockwinkel in the AWA, and they brought in Pat O'Connor. Now, Pat O'Connor, I'm serious, I couldn't believe it. I had seen Pat in the 50s and the 60s, and I was always impressed with how good he was, good worker, on his own way, a high flyer. And he was an old man. He came in the ring, and it was obvious that Nick had to carry him for the entire match. And I just looked at my wife and I said, I wish I wasn't seeing this.
Yeah.
Because you were putting a guy over, the Pat O'Connor at the time, who was 10 years way past what his greatness was. And I can't get into that.
And that's a shame for a guy like Well, just like with Flair, just a shame for a guy like Pat O'Connor to be leave you with that memory.
And that's the last memory I had of Pat O'Connor. And I remember, of course, my wife never saw him, in his premium days, but I did. And he was a whirlwind.
Oh, yeah.
Pat O'Connor was good, but not in 1982.
No. Like that WWF Old Timers Battle Royal. Isn't that brutal?
Guys just kind of walking around the ring.
Yeah.
I've watched that again a couple of times, and I want to know why I did when I do.
Well, guys, let's roll into our classic clip number 2, the Masked Superstar. Of course, though, before the Masked Superstar, he was one half of the Mongols, IWA Tag Team Champions. This was from 1975. Wes, that announcer there, also was a co-host with George Crybaby Cannon on the Superstars of Wrestling out of Canada somewhere.
Sure was. Milt of Ruskin.
And I mean, too bad we don't have enough of these shows either. I think this was a pretty Chic Agnon LKC. And here we see Wes, the Masked Superstar, going after just destroying Canada, one of Canada's great, right? Dino Bravo here in Montreal.
Wow.
I mean, yeah, just look at the brutality. This was their first match. And because really this wasn't even a match, as the beating keeps going on here, they stop it eventually. And then like a month or two, I have footage of the whole match. So they did like a rematch from that. But one of my favorites, Mask, No Mask, Demolition X, Mongol, Bill Eadie, the Masked Superstar, ranks very high up there with me.
Go ahead, George.
Well, I was going to say that I got to see him right around the era you're talking about, and I'd heard about him and seen interviews with that he did. I've always been a masked man fanatic back in the day. I loved masked wrestlers and the different storylines that went with them. But I rate Bill Eadie as one of the best. And I was very disappointed that we got him for such a short time in the AWA. But it was like an open door policy there for about 3 years where guys were coming in, and as soon as they were coming in, somebody was taking them from us. Some guy out east wanted to take over the world. And
oh, jeez. Who the hell was that?
Yeah, I don't know. Some goof. But Bill Eadie, I really think just whatever guys he was in, and that's one of the things that I admired about some of those veteran wrestlers is the different ways they could reinvent themselves, and they were at the top in every one of them. I mean, even his acts in Demolition.
Yes.
Though I wasn't fond of the team, I thought Eadie was phenomenal. Just a great worker. And that short run with the Sheik here, Casey, Adnan Casey, that was good. And the way you saw him, that's the way he'd come in the Civic Center when he'd wrestle here. He'd just start pounding on somebody, and he got over.
Full of steam.
Yeah. Wes?
I really enjoyed every aspect of him, seeing him on TV. I don't think I've ever saw him live, which was a bit of a drag. Maybe I saw Demolition once. I can't really remember, but big, tough, and I love the history of the guy being, with Jito Mongol first, and then with the guy from Florida, Malenko, as his manager when he was with the IWA, and then they switched over to the Mid-Atlantic, and he was what they said, one of the masked bad heel guys who wouldn't shout and scream like everybody else. His interviews were nice words, nice talking, calm, cool, collected. Basically, I'm gonna beat you up, so let's get in the ring.
Yeah, Tony.
Well, I think if my memory is right, I think the Masked Superstar gimmick was the creation of George Scott in North Carolina. and Bill was up there, and George told him what he wanted. And George had really good success when Don Jardine was up there as the Super Destroyer. It was one of the times when he wasn't working as the spoiler, but he. But George wanted another strong masked heel, and he picked Bill to do it, and they came up with the masked superstar thing. The thing about I love about Bill Eadie is that he's one of those guys where even smart bookers like George Scott or Ole Anderson or guys like that, where he had a lot of success. I remember Bill telling the story. I read it or heard it or saw it or something, but Bill said that Ole called him in and he goes, "We've got one big time babyface masked wrestler here, Mr. Wrestling number 2. We got about 7 masked guys working the territory. And when we get to the end of this program, I just want there to be 2, you and Mr. Wrestling number 2. And I'm going to let you figure out how to get us there." And he let Bill pretty much do the program with the other masked guys and how to eliminate them to get down to just. And I just think that's amazing that there was a lot of trust there for Bill's mind, and he had a great mind or does have a great mind for the business.
Benny?
Yeah, I think he was one of the best. I mean, Bob Backlund had a lot of great programs. I thought his program with Backlund was one of the better ones. There was an angle with, I think it was very young Eddie Gilbert, and
Yes.
I think he had just legitimately come back from a car accident, and I guess Superstar gave him a neck breaker, and yeah, I mean, Backlund went crazy. That was a great program. He wherever he was and whatever he did, he was very good.
That MSG match that they had in October of 1983, I mean, they should have gave the belt. Let the match.
You know, it's really funny. I would not have been surprised. I would not have been surprised if he became the champion. That's how good he was
that night.
Yeah.
Mike the Class, do you know the Masked Superstar or just as Demolition?
As Demolition mainly, but I do remember the name Masked Superstar when he did wrestle. So yeah, I remember him quite a bit actually at the time. So yeah, he was very good. He was very good. I mean, I had no issues with his matches. I'm very good as far as the performance, and always put on a good show. You know, he's a bigger guy, so I tend to like the bigger wrestlers.
He's pretty big. He's a big guy.
I think it's fairly safe to say that Masked Superstar, as he was into the 80s, he could have very well be like one of the very last of the masked guys that got over before that mask gimmick is gone and can never come back now.
Right.
But you know, when all the territories had their masked men over the decades, I think he had to be one of the last ones, and a good one. I mean, we had the Irwins down in Texas. They were doing the Super Destroyer gimmicks in the 80s for World Class.
Yeah.
Well, I think another thing to acknowledge too is, and I grew up in the South, so we had every masked tag team you can imagine. But for a masked guy to really put on a great match, he's got to do it without facials.
Yeah.
I think Bill was tremendous at that.
And
I'd be remiss in saying, George, we know who your favorite wrestler was that was masked.
Yes. But Buffalo, New York's own, the sensational Super Destroyer.
Dick Beyer. Yeah. You know, it's interesting about the mask thing, because we were talking a minute ago when we were saying I said that Flair was full of himself. And I get a kick out of the fact that there were certain wrestlers that they sort of got, they believed their own hype, if we want to call it that. And we mentioned Jardine very briefly. I'm going to tell you something. Don Jardine was one heck of a good talent. He was a great worker. He was a great talker. He was a great wrestler. I have no problem with that at all. What bothered me about Jardine is that he believed his own baloney. And, you know, back in the early, he was the spoiler, we know, in the late 60s down in Fort Worth, Dallas, etc. When he went up to New York in the early 70s and they had their stupid, nobody can wear a mask rule.
Right.
whatever that was about. So he goes in there as the spoiler, but without a mask. And he's the spoiler. He was never Don Jardine. Then he leaves there, puts the mask back on. He's the spoiler with a mask again. Then he did this Super Destroyer gimmick in the Carolinas, etc. And then Vern brought him in the late 70s as Super Destroyer with a mask. And when Vern wanted him to unmask, Jardine said, "I won't unmask because it'll ruin my heat. It'll ruin me as a wrestler." And I remember thinking, are you out of your mind? You were in New York for 3 years with your ugly mug on TV every week, And now you're telling me it'll ruin your career. They believed their own baloney. And he left. He just huffed out.
Wasn't that one of the reasons why maybe he never stayed very, very much at any one territory? Maybe he had an issue with who knows, bosses, promoters, rules.
But when you look at some of the guys over the decades, when they would start telling the promoter or the booker or whoever, I'm not going to do this or I won't do that and I won't put this guy over. Those guys, if I was running the company, I'd say, take your boots and get out of here. You can't constantly having the inmates run the asylum.
Right now, Wes, go ahead, George.
No, that's
Wes,
my 2 cents.
We've seen the Masked Superstar, like Tony mentioned too, and NWA Mid-Atlantic / Maple Leaf. He was in Toronto's Maple Leaf Gardens there, tag teaming and singles.
Yes, and what we've said everything about him. I thought he was probably the best. Maybe he never wasn't the most famous masked wrestler, but I really enjoyed him. Other than maybe Dick Beyer, the Destroyer, because he of longevity and his talent also. But he wasn't a bit of a goofball or whatever, jerk or whatever, right?
And I'll tell you something about when we talk about spoiler Jardine, kind of making these demands. I won't do this or I won't do that. In that respect, you have to give a guy like Dick Beyer credit. I will say this. Dick made it very clear from 1962 on that he wasn't going to remove his mask because it became his livelihood. I'll buy into that. But Dick was always willing to put someone over as the Destroyer. He was always willing to lose a match or something that would, somehow he kept his mask. But when Vern wanted to bring him into the AWA, Vern told him, he said, you know what? When your run is done, I'm going to want you to take the mask off. And Beyer said, well, I don't want to do that. Let's come up with a different plan. Let's do something different. And that's how Dr. X was born.
Yeah.
And he said, he's going to do a 3-year run. And at the end of the 3 years, Beyer was more than willing to take off his mask, put the opponents over and leave the territory. And to me, that's a class guy.
That's really smart.
And Vern, he made money doing it that way.
Well, right now, guys, we got to take care of a few things before we end this great classic show. Benny, if you will, please still pick of the ECMC for me.
You want the ECMC here? Go.
Okay, so each and every week we will mention this until we help our friend, Mrs. Robin Restino, needs a kidney. So locally, out of near Buffalo, New York, ECMC is the hospital. You see there on the screen, ECMC transplant. The number is 716-898-6283. Her blood types for the transplant are A negative, A positive, and O. And again, we want to help her out. She's a good friend of ours and her husband, John. And hopefully 1 week we won't have to say this and she'll get her kidney. So we're going to try and help her out this way. Next, Benny, can we, Mike, the class, go to our independent wrestler of the week, please?
Okay, this week's indie wrestler of the week is Nina Samuels out of Progress Wrestling, and that is in Camden, United Kingdom, and she's currently the women's champion and a heel.
And Benny, we have a quick 1 minute action video of her.
From Hampshire, she is the star of the Nina Samuels Show, Nina Samuels.
This crowd tonight is really showing what is on their mind. Irish flip from, stopped in her tracks. Surfboard. Nina Samuels got to hit the surfboard on Leah J. Oh my gosh. This is the most, I think one of the most devastating submission moves.
Yes.
Obviously, he's got others.
Kanji in a horrible position here. What is Nina thinking?
What is Nina doing?
Are you kidding?
Nina Samuels with the ladder and Kanji spinning round. Takes out Lizzie. Takes out Rio as well.
Oh my gosh.
Wow. I mean, that that footage was courtesy of Progress Wrestling out of the UK. And I clipped it, and now watching it, man, what a brute, but what a talent too, I think.
Yeah.
Isn't a ladder illegal?
I think so.
That's more than a foreign object. I don't think she brought it in her trunks.
Although I like that. I like the surfboard hold. That's good.
Yeah.
You beat me to it, Wes. As this classic wrestling fan will tell you, wow, the Mexican surfboard was there. So we still got some classic wrestling.
Pretty good, interesting tidbit out of that Progress Wrestling is that's where Walter, who became Gunther, started.
Oh, wow.
Out of Progress. Yeah. He wrestled for Progress for a while.
Mike, why don't you do our military salute of the week, please?
Sure, absolutely. This week's military salute to service is to Jesse Ventura, who was a U.S. Navy SEAL, and he spent quite a bit of time in there, about 5 years during. It was from December 1969 to September 1975. So we went to SEAL school. Yeah.
Yes.
So this week's salute to service is Jesse the Body Ventura.
And of course, George, everybody, we know the rest was history as a wrestler and a commentator, right?
Yep.
And a governor.
And a governor.
Governor of Minnesota for a while.
You know, it's funny. In 1982, 81, the AWA wrestling roster, and we had Nick, we had Rick Martel, we had the Sheik and Jerry Blackwell and Ken Patera and David Schultz and Hulk Hogan and Jesse Ventura and Adrian Adonis and on and on and on. And if somebody would have said to me that out of that whole group of guys that Jesse would become our governor, I would have taken money on that one and I'd have been the loser.
Yeah.
But Jesse, hey, you know, in all things considered, he wasn't the worst governor we ever had. I have to give him that.
It's interesting that Jesse comes up tonight because I was just 2 days ago, I was talking to Jerry Oates. I don't know if you guys remember Jerry Oates.
Yeah, I've talked with him.
Yeah, Jerry was telling me that Jesse broke in 1975 and his first territory was Kansas City.
Yep.
And he was riding with Jerry and Ted Oates to all the towns. They didn't even charge him trans, Jerry said. So that's it's funny. He was reminiscing about Jesse the other night.
Jesse's really a nice guy. And I want to say that most of the wrestlers that I've ever talked to that worked against him in the ring, the majority of them say that Jesse was tough to work with because he was so stiff. You know, Jesse wasn't a wrestler per se. He was more of the showman. He got over with the whole gimmick. But the thing about Jesse is that when he became governor, like I said, all the governors that have been around in my lifetime in Minnesota, Jesse really wasn't the worst. He'd come out with something every once in a while. We had to put up with the Jesse show every day because it was usually about him. But every once in a while, he'll throw something out and he'll go, you know, it's common sense. And I'm going to share this story with you. We have a thing here in Minnesota where obviously in the winter time it gets cold. And it can be the 1st of November, middle of November. And we haven't had that cold of a weather yet. And the ponds and the lakes are not frozen over yet. And invariably, every year, the news will come on with, well, so-and-so, somebody drove through the ice, their car went into the water, or the kids fell in the ice. And then people will say, well, they should have a law against this. And Jesse came out and said, I can't legislate against stupidity.
Yeah.
And I'm going, Jesse, there you nailed it right there. Exactly. You know, if it's been above 32 degrees and never frozen over, why would you drive your pickup truck on it, you know? And then we got to risk people's lives to pull their buns off a lake. Let them drown, thin out the gene pool.
Yeah, I mean, I actually seen a car go into and over Niagara Falls here.
Yeah.
But that was actually a sad story. But anyway.
Well, it's always sad, and I'm being facetious when I say this.
Of course.
I mean, obviously, I don't want anybody to die or anything, but, you know, it's amazing that we can have people that will drive their car on the ice, and we haven't been below 32 degrees yet. You know, come on, fella.
Yeah. Before we say goodbye here for this week, Benny, can you put up my PSA of the week? As the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation, my 18-year-old is a fireman for the town of Niagara here, Niagara Falls, New York. And so he has always wanted to be a fireman, and he just loves it. And, of course, this was one of the groups, as I do a PSA each week on a different thing. We picked the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. You can look them up on your computer or in your search. And, of course, they help out the fallen firefighters' families. Kind of close to like a Tunnel to Towers thing, if you will. But this week, we wanted to highlight the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation.
Very good.
By all means. And can I just say one thing before we close?
Sure.
You had the little plug on there about the kidney transplant for Robin.
Yes.
And I just want to say that Robin's a person that I keep in my prayers every day. Very nice lady. And if someone's able to help her via kidney transplant or blood donation or whatever it may be, or financially, I know it's been tough on her and John from a financial standpoint. And I just want to say that, you know, we got to keep people like her and all others that are going through these horrible health issues, because we're not in their shoes. But Robin and those others, they need to know that we feel their pain, and that, you know, we got to keep them in our prayers. And Robin deserves whatever support she can get. So that's my plug. Nice people, John and her.
Very nice lady.
God bless her, and I hope it works for her soon.
Well, we're going to mention it each and every week here. You know me. Benny, before we close, we want to thank our historians here, George, Wes, and Tony. Welcome aboard. Thank you for being with us, Tony. I really appreciate it. And, of course, we'll have you on more down the road if you want.
Sure. Thank you so much. Nothing I'd rather do than sit around talking to old friends about old wrestling. So thank you so much for having me.
You and me both, Tony.
Reach out to me, Tony. We'll chat.
There, yeah. I mean, this is our title for this episode 8 already, Reliving Classic Pro Wrestling. And a quick plug to next week, Benny. George and Wes will join us again. And our third guest of the team historians will be Nikita Brezhnikov, who you have a show last night, every Wednesday night, on Monty and the Pharaoh YouTube channel, When It Was Real. And Nikita is the real deal, and a great show there, Benny.
He's the wise man of the East.
So, guys, thank you again. We appreciate your time, and we'll see you next week. Thank you. Take care.
Take care, everybody.